Hi, I'm John Kimble from Social Entropy in Texas, creator of the Engine Multitrack sequencer. There's been a lot of changes since we last saw Engine at NAMM last year, so I'll give you a rundown of some of the new things. Just to start out with, to give you a rundown of Engine itself, it's an 8-track step sequencer. It's got 8 tracks that play simultaneously. They share a master clock but can be set to individual lengths and timings, different shuffle. Within each track you can have 3 different pattern types. So of the 3 pattern types, you can have a synth type pattern, which now can be programmed polyphonically, so you can have a 4-note polyphonic sequence on the synth type pattern. For a synth type pattern, you also have a real-time arpeggiator, so the arpeggiator can be recorded or it can be used as a live performance tool. The second pattern type are drum type patterns, and in a drum type pattern you've got 8 different drum instruments that you can program into the pattern. And the real-time performance mode for a drum type pattern are drum rolls, which allow you to play a note repeat of any of the instruments, and again that can be used in real time or it can be recorded directly into the sequence. And then we've got a new third type of pattern now that we've added based on a lot of feedback from users, and that's a control type pattern. So within a control type pattern, you can now record the movements of the control knobs directly into the sequence, and you can use that then to either control like the parameters of the other tracks, or if you wanted, you could control, for example, the volumes of the different instruments. And then you can also, in real time then, much like the other pattern types, in real time mode we have an LFO for the control type pattern. The LFO allows you to automate the modulation of the knobs. So you can choose the LFO type. So there's triangle, there's ramp up, ramp down, and random mode. You can define the speed of the LFO, so you can have it go based on the tempo of the sequencer from 2 to 128 steps in length. And then you can also control the modulation depth of the LFO. So you can set the lower range as well as the upper range that the LFO will modulate. And again, you can record that in real time, so as the LFO is playing, if you want to record that into the sequence, you can drop right into record mode and record that into the sequence. In terms of the hardware, some of the new things that we've added since the last time you saw this, we've added a second MIDI output. So before we had a single MIDI output, now we've got a dedicated MIDI output number 2, and these are 2 separate outputs, so they're not mirror images of each other. So you can select to send, for example, MIDI clock from one of the outputs and the sequencing from patterns from the other one, so that you can have a nice dedicated clock output for your synchronized machines. As well, we are just about ready to start shipping the CV gate expansion, which is the major new component that we have here. I've actually got one of our close to production prototypes here. So with the CV gate expansion, you've got 16 outputs, dedicated 1 pair per track, or you can reconfigure this in software. So for example, if you had this dedicated for 8 of the tracks, you can have CV and gate coming out for synth type tracks, drum triggers and accent triggers from drum type tracks, and then a gate signal and a control voltage from a control type track. As well, you can also reconfigure that. So for example, if you wanted to control all 16 outputs from a single drum track, you can have all 8 drum instruments and the accent triggers from those drum instruments coming from the outputs of the CV gate expansion. And as well, there are other modes for things like clock. So you can have the division of the master clock coming out, as well as using the control knobs in real time. You can send out a high resolution control voltage from the CV outputs. We also have a mode where you would maybe want more outputs for a single synthesizer track. So you would have the normal CV and gate, but then you'll also have velocity and an accent trigger dedicated for the synth type track. So some of the improvements that we made specifically is it's got a bipolar output for CV and gate. The gate is a 0 to +10 gate signal. The CV now is -3 to +7, so that you have the full range of control over some of the older machines that needed a negative voltage to get to the lower octaves for the oscillator. We use now a high precision 16-bit DAC for the outputs, and we also have dedicated slide circuit, so it emulates the 303 slide circuit, which when you program in the slides on the sequence, it's going to activate that slide circuit and add a slew to the CV output. As well, you can use Engine as an 8-channel CV gate converter. So if you boot into a special mode, you'll be able to have incoming MIDI converted either monophonically or polyphonically. So in the monophonic mode, you've got a dedicated MIDI channel for all 8 of the outputs. In polyphonic mode, you can select a single MIDI channel and it will do dynamic voice allocation to output 8 polyphonic voices from the CV gate expansion. At the same time, you can use it as a densing converter as well, and then the slide can be turned on and off so that you can activate slide when it's played legato, or you can choose to turn that function off as well. So I've got Engine here set up with a live setup. I've got it controlling right now via MIDI the System 1. It's programming the drums on the TR-8. I've got 2 abstract instruments, Avalons, programmed here as well. So everything is being controlled centrally from Engine itself. So if I start the sequence here, we've got an example of the 303 is coming from this Avalon over here, and you can use actually MIDI control to tweak the sound of the Avalon in real time. So in this case, I'm using a MIDI controller to tweak the filter cutoff of the Avalon in real time. If, for example, you want to do something live, if I jump into arpeggiator mode, I can start to override some of the sequence with the arpeggiator in real time. And again, this is also programming the TR-8. So for example, if I wanted to switch patterns on the TR-8, I can switch between the different patterns on the Avalon as well. So for example, here's another pattern on this Avalon. And again, as I switch tracks, I can control the parameters of the different machines. So for the drum type, if I show, for example, the roll mode, I can go into drum roll mode. I can create a snare drum roll. Again, this can be all done in real time. When I let go of the performance mode, it goes back to the program sequence. And then if I wanted to, I can record that into the sequence. So if I record this snare drum roll into the sequence, it's now going to be in the sequence. And then I can go in and edit it in step edit mode. One other thing that I've added based on user feedback was a live mode. So I'm going to go ahead and mute the snare drum. So now in arpeggio mode, if for example I wanted to play the sequence, the synthesizer in real time, in arpeggio mode now you can now use the keyboard as just a controller keyboard. And you can also do that using an external MIDI controller. So if you had an external MIDI controller hooked up, you can use Engine to re-channelize and control multiple machines based on the track that you have selected. For things like chord memory, you can also use the incoming MIDI control message to output a chord, and then you can also in real time transpose multiple sequences at the same time based on MIDI input. So for example, if you've got 4 sequences playing with a synth type pattern, you can transpose all 4 of them simultaneously using an external MIDI controller. So that's a rundown of some of the new things with Engine. Engine's been shipping since October. Directly from our website, it's $665. The CV gate expansion should be shipping within the next few months, and that would be an additional $125 for the CV gate expansion. If you'd like to find out more, we've got all the information about Engine posted on our website at www.socialentropy.com, where you can download the user manual, look at the updates for the operating system with release notes, as well as the other products we sell, the Quicksilver upgrades for the Quicksilver 303, Quicksilver 606, and our upcoming Quicksilver 808 upgrade for the TR-808.